You fish like a medieval nun. And that's a compliment. You're probably wondering, Mark, what the hell are you talking about? Well, if you're an angler or a history buff, you'll want to stick around, because I'm about to tell the interesting tale of the first English text written on angling. I'll be using the treatise of fishing with an angle to examine how this sport has changed in the last 500 years, and how it has largely stayed the same. It may come as a bit of a surprise that the first person to pen a guide on fishing with a rod, reel, and hook was an English nun born around 1388. Her name was Juliana Berners. What may be even more surprising is that this text is still largely relevant to what we anglers believe today, in my opinion. The treatise of fishing with an angle meaning hook in this case, contains a multitude of insights that seem ahead of their time, not only regarding fishing techniques, but also ideas about conservation and courteous fishing. So without further ado, let's dive in and review some of this 500-year-old manual on our favorite hobby. I can't cover everything that she talks about, so I highly suggest checking it out through the links in the description. I'll mostly be referencing the updated version from Sports Illustrated writer Alfred Dugan, who painstakingly translated it from this. For any lover of the sport, Berners comes across as instantly likable, as her opening paragraph states, "Good sport and honest games are a cause of man's fair age and long life. Therefore, now I will choose out of 4 good sports and honest games, that is to say, hunting, hawking, fishing, and wildfowling. The best in my simple opinion is the form of fishing called angling with a rod, line, and hook. Of this I shall treat as fully as my simple intelligence will allow." Stroking our egos right off the bat while being as humble as possible? What a great lady, right? She then goes on to justify this belief by more or less stating that hunting is too exhausting, hawking is too frustrating, wildfowling is boring and cold, and she even throws shade on other forms of fishing that aren't angling. But, she states, the angler need suffer no cold, nor disease, nor annoyance, unless he brings it on himself. He may have no other annoyance, unless a fish break away after taking the hook, or he catches nothing, which are not serious annoyances. Speak for yourself. If he does not catch one fish, he will catch another, so long as he follows the teachings of this treatise. Unless, indeed, there is nothing in the water. Even then he has a wholesome walk and is happy at his ease in the fresh air, sweet with the scent of meadow flowers. Honestly, she sounds like a pretty chill person, and someone I'd probably want to fish with. What she said echoes the sentiment of a phrase I often hear anglers use. A bad day of fishing is better than a good day at work. At least you got out there to enjoy nature, which is a reward in itself. Now to start with the equipment of the angler, the first major difference between today and in the 15th century is that an angler had to make virtually all of their equipment themselves. Fishing with an angle contains detailed instructions on how to create rods, fishing line, floats, hooks, and sinkers from supplies that could be harvested from the English countryside. While materials and methods of manufacturing are destined to change over the years, much of the function and knowledge surrounding this equipment still rings true. Berners describes a rod made of hazel, willow, or ash, which is interestingly collapsible into 2 pieces, not unlike what many recreational anglers use today. Another difference between the angling beliefs of the 2 eras had to do with fishing line. Fishing with an angle instructs readers to create their line using dyed horsehair that is eventually braided, with 3 strands creating a length of line. This doesn't sound too far off from the braided line of today. However, much more importance seems to be placed on color in the 15th century. Berners explains that there are 6 colors of line that an angler should have: yellow, green, brown, tawny, russet, and dusk. She again goes into great detail on how to formulate these dyes. The exact reasoning behind the colors is not explicitly stated, but Berners tells us when to use them, so some inferences can be made. Green in all clear water from April to September, yellow in all clear water from September to November, for it looks like the weed and other grasses in the rivers when they are in flood. Russet serves all through winter to the end of April, both in rivers and in pools or lakes. Brown serves for black and stagnant water, in rivers and other places. Tawny for healthy or marshy waters. She also states elsewhere that the default white hairline is for trout and grayling. By the sounds of it, the thinking behind these different colors was to blend into the natural habitat and be less conspicuous. As far as I'm aware, anglers do not put so much thought into the color of their lines today. We have yellows and greens and some other colors, I'm sure, but there isn't the same level of importance in having all colors available and switching between seasons. However, the goal remains pretty similar, to be as invisible as possible. So how about terminal tackle? To quickly recap, hooks were made of needles which were bent, filed, and tempered by the angler themselves. Same basic concept as today, along with a barb and everything. Weights were made of, you guessed it, lead. Now we're really starting to see some similarities to modern angling. The cork floats described are nearly identical to some bobbers today as well. Now for the good stuff. The discussion on the art of angling itself. Some of the things Berners wrote really surprised me, as I realized most of the tribal knowledge I'd learned over the years from other anglers was actually laid down by one badass nun 500 years ago. She starts by saying that there are 6 types of angling, and while this list was clearly limited by her being so early to the game and only fishing the English countryside from shore, it still contains some valid tidbits. These types of angling are 1. On the bottom for trout and other fish. 2. On the bottom by an arch or near piles where the tide ebbs and flows for the bleak, roach, and dace. 3. With a float for any kind of fish. 4. With minnow as live bait, without weight or a float for trout. 5. With a fly on the line of 1 or 2 hairs for roach and dace. And 6. With an artificial fly for trout and grayling. I find it pretty great that just fish under the bridge has been solid advice for half a millennium now, as well as the notion that a bobber rig is for when you just want to catch anything but don't really care what. Oh yeah, and you heard that 6 point correctly, they were already tying flies back in those days. I'm not a big fly person, but if you are, I highly suggest reading her fly descriptions. Being stealthy was also high on the list of considerations according to Berners. The first and the most important point in angling is to keep away from the water, out of sight of the fish. Either stand well back or else behind a bush, so that the fish do not see you. If they see you, they will not bite. Also, see that as far as possible you do not shadow the water, for such a thing will soon frighten the fish, and if a fish has been frightened, he will not bite for a long time afterwards. I find the image of hiding behind a bush with all my gear pretty hilarious, but she has a point. Anglers today will still advise you to be quiet and stay a few feet back from shore while casting to not spook the fish. The importance of this is highly dependent on what you're fishing for, as some fish don't seem to care as much as others. You should angle on the bottom, with your hook running or lying on the bottom for all fish that feed on the bottom. For all fish that feed above the bottom, you should angle to them in the middle of the water, or somewhat beneath or somewhat above. Always remember that the bigger the fish, the nearer the bottom he lies, and the smaller the fish, the higher he swims. Makes perfect sense. Some fish feed off the bottom, and some don't. I'm not sure if I agree with her final sentence, however. At least not as a hard rule. In general, it could be true that bigger fish are on the bottom, but this also depends on what species you are targeting. Her next major point involves not striking too soon or too late when a fish bites, as well as taking your time to wear a big fish out before landing it. Both great tips that hold true today. When it comes to finding fishing spots, our author gives advice that is also still given today. In a river, you should angle in every deep place where the bottom is clear, such as gravel or clay, without mud or weeds. Angle especially where there is an eddy or good cover for fish, such as a hollow bank, or great roots of trees, or long weeds floating above in the water, where the fish may hide themselves at certain times when they choose. Good places are deep, stiff streams, waterfalls or weirs, and in floodgates or mill races. Other good places are in still water by the bank, with the stream running near, and a clear bottom, and in any place where you see fish rising or feeding. I would say that, overall, this is pretty good advice that can still be followed today. Everyone wants to know the best time of day and weather conditions for fishing, and beliefs on these topics vary greatly amongst anglers. Well, thankfully Juliana Berners figured that all out for us a long time ago, and we've just been ignoring her. Now you shall know at what time of day you should angle. From the beginning of May into September, the biting time is early in the morning, from 4 to 8, and in the afternoon from 4 to 8. But this is not so good as in the morning and if it is a cold whistling wind and a dark lowering day. For always a dark day is much better to angle in than a clear one. From the beginning of September until the end of April, angle at any time of the day. I agree with her there regarding summertime fishing, and I'm not going to argue with someone telling me to go crazy in fall and winter, since I love fishing during that time of year. She goes on to talk about weather some more. The most favorable weather is a dark lowering day with a soft wind, as I said above. In summer, a burning hot day is useless, but from September to April, a fair sunny day is a very good time to angle. And if the wind in that season has any east in it, the weather is not good for angling. When it snows, rains, or hails, or is a tempest such as thunder or lightning, or sultry hot weather, then also angling is bad. Again, some great advice regarding sunny versus cloudy days. I also agree with the second half of her statement, and believe what she was describing boils down to fishing isn't great during changes in barometric pressure. Many of us today have observed that fish prefer a steady barometric pressure, and though fishing can be great during a light rain, severe weather doesn't usually bring the fish out to feed until after things calm down a bit. If you're having trouble catching fish, you might want to pay close attention to this next section. Berners laid out 12 reasons why you're getting skunked. There are 12 impediments that can cause a man to take no fish, apart from casual bad luck. The first is wrong or badly made tackle. The second is wrong or bad bait. The third is to angle when the fish are not biting. The fourth is if the fish have been frightened by sight of a man. The fifth is if the water is very thick, either white or red from recent flood. The sixth is if it is too cold for the fish to stir. The seventh is if it is too hot. The eighth if it is raining. The ninth if it is snowing or hailing. The 10th if there is a tempest. The 11th, gales. The 12th if the wind is in the east. And that is worst, because generally then the fish will not bite, either in winter or summer. West or north winds are good, but the south wind is the best. Most of this information is still useful today, although some could be chalked up to superstitions, since we've all probably caught a nice fish at a time and place that went against conventional wisdom. Points 9 through 12 are again related to barometric pressure, and east wind is believed to be associated with rising pressure, so it's pretty impressive that she made these observations 200 years before the barometer was invented. A long section on which baits to use for a number of English fish, along with which time frames to use them, follows. I don't fish for most of the species she talks about since I'm in the Midwest of the United States, but I'm sure it's still a useful guide and that many of the baits still work today. I mean, how could you ever go wrong with things like redworms, cheese, or maggots? The fish she talks about targeting are salmon, trout, grayling, barbel, carp, chub, bream, tench, perch, roach, dace, bleak, rough, flounder, minnow, eel, and pike. Yeah, this lady definitely outfished most of us. The nuns seem to have a love-hate relationship with the pike, however. Her passages on them contain some of my favorite parts of the whole publication. The pike is a good fish, but because he devours so many, even of his own kind as well as other fish, I love him the least. And if you want to see some good sport, tie the end of the line to the foot of a goose. Then you shall see hard pulling, as goose and pike pull against one another. Just when we thought this lady couldn't be any more fun to be around, we find out she's out there tying pike to geese and sitting back to watch the show? That image alone is why reading old-ass books is worth it. The final topic I'd like to discuss in relation to today's angler is the importance of respecting the animals, the land, and your fellow human. You who can angle and take fish whenever you desire, as this aforesaid treatise teaches and shows you, I charge and require you, in the name of all noble men, that you never fish in the private water of a poor man, such as his pond, stew, or other place needed to keep fish in, without his permission and goodwill, and that you never break any man's traps, lying in his weir or in any other place belonging to him, nor take away any fish caught in them. I totally agree with her here. We need to be respectful while we're out there fishing, but notice that she doesn't say anything about fishing the private waters of a rich man. If you do as this treatise shows you, you shall never have need to take fish of other men, for you will have sufficient of your own catching if you are willing to work for them. It will be a very great pleasure to you to see the fair, bright, shining scaled fishes deceived by your crafty means and drawn to land. I like this part because the brimming confidence just makes her sound like an influencer selling a course. Just do what I told you, and you're guaranteed to catch fish. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, never be so greedy as to take too much game at one time, which you may easily do if you follow this treatise in every particular, which may easily destroy your own sport, and the sport of others also. When you have sufficient game, you should covet no more at that time. Also, take trouble to preserve the game in every way you can, and to destroy all such things that devour it. Basically, this book is your secret weapon to angling, so use it wisely. Although what she says is completely true, follow the regulations laid out by the people in charge. They're there for a reason. And don't be a slob while you're out there fishing, clean up after yourself. In regards to that second part of the statement, just make damn sure you know that what you're destroying is actually detrimental to the native environment. Don't go around spearing quillback or something. The final paragraph was added by the printer of the book, and reminds me of the lengths some will go to sometimes keep knowledge from other anglers, in hopes their favorite hole doesn't get fished out. So that this treatise may not fall into the hands of every idler who might desire it, as it might if it were printed by itself in a little pamphlet, I have compiled it in a greater volume of various books, which will be of interest to gentle and noble men, so that the aforesaid idle persons, who would have little moderation in the sport of fishing, shall not utterly destroy it. Basically, you only gained access to this information by being a smarty-pants, book-learning type person, in a time where only 20% of people could read. Something like that has no place in fishing today, Because as we know, fishing is for everyone. Even those of us who can't read. I think we anglers all owe this nun a bit of thanks. Without her endless hours of trial and error, our favorite sport/hobby might be very different today. I'm glad I was able to tell this story and take a bit of a look back on how fishing has changed over the years. And like I said, I highly recommend reading it in full. It's not very long at all. I hope this video was informative and entertaining. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a like and maybe check out another video on the channel. Thanks everyone, and stay restless, my friends.